Welcome to episode 4 of the weekly duck migration forecast. This week we're going to talk about Monday, October 26th through the 1st of November on Sunday. So, 7-day forecast. Lots to talk about, so we'll jump right in. The big weather news for the continent is going to be Hurricane Zeta. Um, Potential to really pull a lot more moisture towards the, focused kind of towards Washington, D.C., but throughout the southeast where folks don't need it. As that low pressure system moves in, it's going to pull a high pressure system towards it so that there's going to be some cold that's going to, and snow that's going to come in out in central Flyway. But again, probably going to spin out to sea over Delaware, New Jersey area, not get up towards the Great Lakes where there is actually a drought condition right now. With that storm will come more rain, again, in areas that tend not to use it. Why do we talk about the rain accumulation? If you go back to episode 1 and some other episodes, a lot of times ducks will make it to southern latitudes, but there's so much water that they have a lot of options. So it makes hunting somewhat difficult sometimes. Our weather severity index does not include rain accumulation, but we've noted that lots of times, again, the ducks do get to southern latitudes. They are just very spread out, and unless you have the capacity to be mobile and follow ducks as they move, it can sometimes make finding ducks relatively difficult because they can go anywhere they want. We get a bit of snow accumulation, maybe a shot in northern Missouri even this week that may push some early migrants south. I know folks at southern latitudes might be getting itchy as we start to move into November and think about some openers kind of more around the Thanksgiving time. A little too early to tell, but the early cold we had in the prairies and upper Midwest is certainly potentially helpful with moving birds, as we'll see some of the numbers in Iowa this last week and this coming week are definitely strong enough to move some of those early migrating dabbling ducks south. Remember to email me your questions at weeklyduckmigrationforecast@gmail.com. I'm guessing you can come up with a lot better questions than things I can make up here as we go along. I did not get any new questions this week. So I'm going to cover, when that happens, I will cover a common question that I tend to get when I talk to the public. So this one is probably the most typical one that I get is, has the migration changed for dabbling ducks? Is it occurring later than, say, 20 years ago? And lots of times folks are really interested in mallards because mallards seem to be the ones that kind of hang up and stay towards the freeze line, if any of them. So I'll go ahead and answer that with a couple papers, one that I'm a co-author on. We worked this up a few years ago. So the simple answer is yes. And we've got, this is simply using weather data that predicts duck migration and then asking if that weather that makes ducks migrate has changed. And if the left column are the species that we investigated, which are black ducks, widgeon, gadwall, greenwing teal, mallards, pintails, and shovelers, the same ones here that we produced this forecast for. This is and then the next column is the mean migration date out of the Great Lakes region during the late 20th century. So this would be like the typical timing of migration out of the Great Lakes region to points further south of what we would consider a typical migration from the last 20 or 30 years that we'd be accustomed to. And then if we look at the mid 21st century minus that late 20th century, this is how much the weather severity index predicts, just the weather that caused ducks to migrate, predicts that duck migration would have shifted. So we're looking at a half a month or a little over half a month for just about every one of these species that they're migrating later out of the Great Lakes region. So this means that they're getting to these, mid-latitude, southern latitudes about a half month later than what they did, say, 20 years ago. Now, if we project into the future under continued climate change models, we're going to see about an entire month later. And even for mallards and black ducks, sometimes the weather severity doesn't get severe enough for them to leave the region at all during the winter. That is, they are actually able to stay through December and January. So the far right one is predicted out into the future, um, but consistent with the trend that we've seen of birds staying north for longer periods of time. So one of the questions I get is, well, Mike, that's not actual ducks. That's just the weather that causes ducks to migrate. So some colleagues in Canada used surveys. If you look at that map, there's surveys from along the St. Lawrence River, the north shoreline of Lake Ontario, the Niagara River, out along Lake Erie along the North Shore, and up the Detroit River to Lake St. Clair. And they used survey data from 1968 to 2011. And lo and behold, they find almost the same exact change. The figure on the left, those that are in that darker blue, are species whose timing of movement, their migration, their peak timing of migration through that area that's highlighted in green has changed through time. And so mallards 14 days later, black ducks 18 days later, gadwall 11 days later, and widgeon 13 days later. And so this is actual data, and it really lines up, plus or minus a few days. It really lines up with us saying that, yeah, migration shifted about 2 weeks later than what it traditionally was. So yeah, if you got questions on topics like that, go ahead and send them to me at weeklyduckmigration@gmail.com, and I'll answer them on here. But what everybody shows up for, let's jump right into the summary. The cold that hit the Mississippi Flyway and the snow really starts to moderate, and that band of cold air starts to shift into the Atlantic Flyway as that cold front moves across the continent. So as that cold moves out, really the greatest likelihood of a push of ducks in the Mississippi Flyway is for early this week. And then late in the week, Friday and Saturday night in the Atlantic Flyway is predicted is the best time. The movements are really going to be widgeon, green-winged teal, shoveler, and gadwall, but not much predicted for mallards and black ducks. As you'll see, it's not intense enough. So if I was going to hunt in the Mississippi Flyway, somewhere in the upper Midwest, I'd be focused on the beginning of the week. If I was going to hunt in the Atlantic Flyway, I'd focus on the weekend if I was looking at picking up some flight ducks. Southeast continues to be really wet in the U.S., and Zeta will really not help that situation. And a lot of areas in the Great Lakes remain in drought conditions. As I said, it looks like that tropical system is going to spin out, say, over Washington and then go out to the coast. If it came inland up through Ohio and across western Pennsylvania into New York, that would really help those drought conditions in the upper Atlantic Flyway. So let's jump into the tables for species. For mallards and black ducks, we see, as noted, the Atlantic Flyway really doesn't have a lot going on. I will say that I hunted last week a couple times, and kind of after that cold front out that kind of cut across, it would have got to the upper Great Lakes and into northwestern Ontario. And we do seem to have picked up some mallards in the east. And that's just a testament to the fact that we do derive some ducks from the prairies and then western and northwestern Ontario and Manitoba and such. We definitely picked up a lot of pintails and some other species, just a few mallards, which wouldn't be predicted to be coming out of kind of eastern Ontario and Quebec and that region. So I don't think we're getting pushes of those ducks. I think anything that we picked up came from the northwest, especially with a northwest wind a few nights. I always beat the drum that our ducks in the east really come from the east, from Ontario and Quebec, but we know that they do come out of more western areas as well. Our lab actually has some investigation into to what degree things like pintails and scaup are coming out of the east relative to the the breadbasket of ducks in the mid-continent. But last week we definitely picked up some birds. Again, a smattering of mallards and black ducks. So I'm thinking those must probably be coming out of northwestern Ontario to a large degree. As that cold front kind of hit and lakes froze up in that part of the world. As you see, the Dakota's got that good shot of snow, a lot of cold, a lot of shallow potholes and such froze up. Things are going to moderate. I don't know if that's going to be enough to um, keep ducks around. I feel like it's gonna linger for a little while. And mallards are definitely going to be, Missouri River and places like that, where in large lakes, where small wetlands have frozen up. Might make it tough. It's going to concentrate hunters as well. But definitely moderating. I mean, starting today and tomorrow, it's going to be quite a bit of a warm up in that part of the world, and see how much it thaws to hold those birds and maybe redistribute them. If we look at mallards and black ducks compared to last year, I'll just, this is for mallards, obviously in Devil Stick, North Dakota. Um, but a real early cold shot here in 2020. We see that hump in that um, regression line that goes beyond the threshold. You see it moderate really quickly. In 2019, it started to go beyond that threshold in a not a much later date, but about a week later. But then it also did the same thing where the weather moderated and warmed back up. So in 2019, the full freeze out for mallards really didn't start until around Thanksgiving. That doesn't mean mallards weren't moving south. There were some good cold shots. But I think that's what you're going to have to watch is like this bump right here in 2020. There was a good bunch of birds of mallards, like Iowa, for instance, and northern Missouri, Illinois. I know all picked up a good number, a reasonable number of mallards for this time of the year. So you got to keep watching through this weather severity index, so this weekly duck migration forecast, when those bumps are occurring. To look at pintails, that's another story. I mean, in the west, in the Mississippi Flyway, pintails should really be on the move. There's always some, obviously, that linger. As you go east, you get a much lighter migration. Really, some of the first cold that we've seen that might move pintails, kind of, eastern breeding pintails out of the Ottawa River Valley and off of Lake Ontario and to points further south. Um, so definitely good movement of pintail going on. Again, we in central New York picked up a bunch this week. I think, again, those are probably birds coming out of the west to a large degree more than from the north on us. But we should be seeing some more movement, light movement this week, and definitely continued light movement in the west. There was a real strong movement of increase in pintails. Again, Iowa and in Missouri, but in Illinois latitudes and the Mississippi Flyway this week. We compare Syracuse, New York. In the coming week, we're just hitting that first point where pintails might start to move out. We have a real good number of them in the central New York region right now, and we'll be sending a few of them south. A lot of our birds leave our region, and then North Carolina, the coastal North Carolina is where a lot of those birds go, but we're really not quite there yet. And we're about on pace for last year, other than a little bump of cold again Friday, Saturday night, move some birds further south. Look at Gadwall. Now we're starting to get into these ducks to move a little bit sooner, and we should expect, again, this is where Missouri, even southern, central southern Missouri, um, in western Kentucky and Tennessee might be starting to pick up a few of these birds lightly at this time. They're starting to get froze out of these most northern areas. And then as we go through Gadwall and into shovelers and then widgeon and green winged teal, one of the things you're going to start seeing in the east is that these numbers, the amount of blue, especially in the central New York area, starts to really pick up quite a bit. And that's something in our part of the world that we call the November lull. And our season now opens for 3 weeks, and then it closes to avoid that November lull. And what happens is that these early ducks, not ducks that aren't mallards and black ducks, move out. So Gadwall, widgeon, green winged teal, and shovelers, kind of in pintails too, start moving out, and we don't really pick up mallards and black ducks yet. So there's this in between time when it just seems kind of dead for numbers of birds, and it looks like we might be entering that. Starting to enter that trickle out of those early migrants pretty soon. Shoveler, there you go. I mean, you see a little more blue show up in the east. These birds are moving. They're a much earlier migrant, and they're, especially in the Mississippi Flyway, their really numbers are probably building um, mid latitude ish and even showing up at some southern latitude. And then widget and green wing teal are the ones that we should start seeing really good movement. And again, it depends on if the weather in the east, if it's cold shot, just is a one-time thing, or it continues in the following weeks. Um, I think again, these birds that should be your earliest migrants and moving down the flyway. So as we go in order from these, you know, least tolerant to cold and snow to the most tolerant, my expectation is during the coming week that's the movement of birds we're largely going to see are these, you know, the early migrants that are less tolerant, and then a trickle down, you know, get all the way up to pintails, and I would say there'd be a trickle down the flyways to those for the most part. If we compare this widgeon and green wing teal in the Atlantic flyway, we look at kind of, you know, on Friday in 2020, we're seeing about a week, right? Almost a week difference. I projected this out for um, the the 2019 data to November 14th, and you can see that those birds really got out of town. You know, really kind of that around November 7th or so. So we're looking a lot like 2019, but about 7 days earlier. The question is whether that will continue, that weather will continue to be severe or not. If we look out at Des Moines, Iowa, that threshold's been met here for quite a while in 2020. You know, we're looking slightly worse than 2019 as we project out this week. That is, there might be a little bit more movement, but the threshold for, you know, widgeon and green wing teal to start moving out of the latitude of Iowa was met within 5 days of each other between 2019 and 2020. So right now, overall, it looks like 2020 is slightly colder. Bird migration is slightly ahead of schedule compared to 2019, but relatively comparable. I mean, we're only talking maybe 5 to 7 days different at this point. Um, so again, I think the mid-latitude folks should really be doing well this week. Those seasons that are open should have picked up birds and should pick up a few more birds early in the week in the Mississippi Flyway, and then later in the week in the Atlantic Flyway. River gauges last week in, you know, the New England region got, you know, they got a shot of rain and they came back up, but those areas have really dried out. Again, the southeast remains really wet. The upper Midwest got a shot of water that helped out some regions, but still some generally dry patches there. And again, that, you know, kind of Lake Ontario, Lake Erie basin of New York and Pennsylvania is kind of hurting for water in general. So again, just think about these things as you're planning your hunt. Make sure to scout your areas and understand what your water conditions are. We talk about Arctic snow cover. If we look on the left, the red line is 2020, and then all the other squiggly lines are, you know, the accumulation of snow in Eurasia throughout the winter period, and we're right near decadal means at this point. And again, we use this for predicting long-term weather, so it matters for our southern counterparts that have seasons that are primarily in December, in January. And so we're not quite, you know, the next week, I would say I'll be able to give a very definitive answer to what December and January will look like. I still think I'm still favoring 2 or 3 good shots of cold in December that'll move ducks into the southern reaches of the flyways, enough abundance for some reasonable hunting. But that January is going to get really mild, and a lot of temperatures in the 50s as far north as the Great Lakes. Um, that's just based on past weather and what the global climate in general is doing. This Arctic sea ice cover, or you know, percent of the, or sorry, extent million square kilometers of coverage, really freaked climatologists out this week. The Arctic is just not gaining ice, and that one is has large scale ecosystem effects. You know, a lot of this again is just the planet's really warm and it just can't build ice. So now we're in record low ice for this time of year because 2012 was the record minimum, and we'd never seen. Usually that line should be gaining as we gain, you know, millions of square kilometers of ice throughout the Arctic. So this one has the potential to affect again our pressure systems and how wobbly that polar vortex becomes, and if we get cold outbreaks in the December January period. So we'll be watching this closely as we get towards the um, the November period and start talking about duck migration for folks at southern latitudes as their seasons open. So thanks, folks. That's this week's migration weekly duck migration forecast. Email me your question, weekly duck migration forecast at gmail.com. Remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It helps you keep up to date with this stuff. And I'm doing these weekly until the end of January. So thanks for listening. Be safe and shoot straight. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.